Let's hope for the best because I'm not wearing my contacts again. So if I'm blurry, I'm blurry. Sorry about it. Okay. Hey everyone, it's me again, Brittany, and I'm here today to do a high fantasy recommendations video. I've gotten this request so many times, so many times, and I've just never really quite felt prepared for it, and even now I still don't feel prepared for it. I feel like out of all the fantasy that I've read, I basically talk about the ones that I'm going to talk about right now the most, and I feel like you might already know it, but I'm still going to make this video for you guys because you really want it, so I'm here to deliver. So I have 8 books here today, and they're all first in series. I'm not doing like, well, I'm kind of doing a series recommendation more than just the book itself. So yes, let us begin. My first book on this list is actually one that I never talk about, and that is The Winner's Curse by Marie Rukowski. And I read this quite a while ago. It's a very different sort of high fantasy. It doesn't have like that very ingrained magic system that we're so accustomed to. It's very based in politics. So if you're intrigued with like the fantasy politics situation, then this one's really cool because it follows the daughter of basically the best general in the new empire. Yes. And this empire has been taking over countries as it will, and they use the country's people that they take over as slaves, and this story starts with her actually buying a slave from the country that she's staying in, and as you could probably guess, there's a love story, but it is very based in politics, so I want to start there, and it has a lot to do with war, so it's very intriguing. I do think that the first book in the series was the best out of the entire series, so be warned there, but the ending is still pretty solid. Next up is actually kind of a newer addition to my fantasy love, is The Demon King by Cinda Williams Chima. I've obviously only read the first one, so I don't know if that goes to show just how much I love it, or if this was naive of me to put it in so early, but I loved it. And I think the biggest part about this series that stood out to me was the plot. The plot of the series is very well formed, and you can really just tell that it's gonna destroy you in the later books, because this one is just so much buildup. It just is setting all the characters in the places that they're going to need to be for the ending, and I really loved it. It follows 2 different storylines. One is of sort of a peasant trader boy, and he has to make a living for his mom and his younger sister because his mom is unable to do it for them in the empire that they live in. So he does a lot of trading, he does a lot of hunting, and he used to be part of a notorious street gang, but not anymore. He has turned a new leaf. And then our other character that we follow is the princess of this world. I think her name's Reina? Oh. Her name is Reza, and she is just hard-headed, and she's fantastic. I actually really love her as a character. She really has a lot of curiosity in her, and she's willing to question the things that everyone else in this world is just taking for granted, like her mother. Her mother is not doing what's best for the kingdom, it might seem, and Reza is trying to get to the bottom of it. There's also tons of magic in this. There are wizards, I believe that's what they're called in this, or are they sorcerers? Either way, you know what I'm talking about, and I love it. I really do enjoy the different aspects of the world that we are introduced to, because there's also the clans, and that's where mostly we see Hans, and we also see obviously the actual kingdom, which is where Reza spends most of her time. And they haven't met yet in that book, but they will, and it's gonna be great. I just like, the buildup it's getting to me. Next up is actually a series I hold near and dear to my heart. It's one that I really want to do a reread of soon, because I know that in more recent years people have said that this isn't her best work. Well, obviously, because, well, let's just talk about it. And that's Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I loved the first and second book. I will be quite honest with you, Ruin and Rising is probably one of my most hated books of all time. I hate the ending for that. I hate the resolution. I hate how her love story ends. I hate it all. I really don't like, well, I don't like the ending of Ruin and Rising. I think the build-up throughout the entire book is very well done. I just don't like how this ends. I don't know if that's gonna deter you from reading this. I still think you really should pick it up, especially if you were a big fan of Six of Crows, because even though Six of Crows is like her masterpiece after her sketches, Shadow and Bone is just so good. It introduces you to the magic of the world, and the magic is so interesting. They're sorted by colors, and it's just, it's so cool, and there's the little palace, and it's just very atmospheric. So we follow Alina Starkov, and she is a soldier in an army, in the army, but like not a Grisha soldier. She's just a regular run-of-the-mill soldier. And one day, going through this dark pass that splits their land in half, and it's really just an area of absolute darkness that monsters roam in. Her ship, I don't know what they call it exactly anymore. I don't know what they were called. Yeah, it's like a ship that goes over the sand, gets attacked, and in her fear, she releases this power, this sunlight style power to save her friend. And it's very odd because Grisha are normally beautiful and they are normally found a lot earlier in life, and she was way past the point of finding her powers. So it's such a cool story following her, and I love the magic in this world. It's just, if you haven't read it and you've read Six of Crows and you want to continue with the series with King of Scars, you have to read this. You really do. You have to. It's just the background of everything. Perfect. But what are you gonna do? Next up on this list is a book that's writing is absolutely perfect. That is just, it's so atmospheric in such a completely different way. It's so magical and perfect, and let's just talk about Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I didn't expect to love this book as much as I did. It's just, the premise was so weird. I remember just hearing that there's this guy called Laszlo Strange, and he's a librarian, and one day these people that are going to visit this lost city of Weep that's just been lost to history, that's been thought of as a myth, want to find someone that's gonna help them get there. And Laszlo's the only one that's ever studied Weep because everyone else just thought it was a myth and they kind of just let it fall to the myths. But it's just so much better than that. Like, Laszlo's story alone is just so fascinating. He starts in such a dark place and like he gets to be in a place that he really wanted to be in, and I love his story. I love the mythology in this, really, is what it is. It's so fascinating, and we follow kind of a different storyline at the same time, and they never really talked about that in the summarizing, so I'm not gonna really talk about it, but just know it's really, really cool, and you don't really see how they're gonna mix together, and then in the end they do, and it's just, it hurts. Well, I mean, you see how they mix together, but it's just like, there's even a step above that. It's just, Laini Taylor has such a way with words, and she made the world that was already so whimsical even better, and it was just, I loved it. I really did. Yes. Next on this list is another book that I think that if you like political style fantasies, then you're really gonna like this, and I want to start by saying that normally if someone had tried to sell me a book by saying that it was politically based, I would have said no, because I don't really like politics. I'm like, nah. But it's been recent. It's only in recent years or even recent months that I've realized that actually politics are quite fascinating in fantasy worlds. So that book is going to be The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. It's so cool. I mean, it's just very, very different. It's not like the regular fantasies that I tend to read. I go for the more like classically badass female that there's like some kind of really magical world, and magic is like the base of it all, and that's kind of like the fantasies that I really like, and love stories and things like that. And this one, it doesn't have almost any of that. really. I mean, our female lead is badass. In her own way, she is very strong. She is very strong-willed, and she has been trained to be a queen for her whole life. So she's smart. She has all this background that we never really get to hear about in other kinds of fantasies, I feel like. And she's not very pretty. She's not classically pretty at all. So that's also like a really big thing that they like to point out in this, because normally the queens are very beautiful, and she just happens to not be. So her brain, her drive, her passion, her motives are really what drive this story, and it's really amazing to see how people will fall in line to her kind of demeanor, and I loved it. It's just, the politics were amazing. There's just so much that goes on, and it's kind of war-based a little bit, but it's just the strategy that goes into this. It just feels realistic. I know it probably isn't, but it felt very realistic. And there's still magic though, so I do want to point that out. There is this kind of like touch of magic that really, like, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. So this is more of a mature fantasy, if anything. Next up is another book that I feel like I talk about fairly often, and it's because I fell in love, and that's The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This one, I would have to say, is the kind of fantasy that's just like, well, it is whimsical, but it's more, it's just dark, and it is the kind of fae shenanigans that happen. If you've read The Mortal Instruments, the fae in this really remind me of the fae that are in that story. And it's really cool because they follow a whole different set of rules, and it's just how the fae have always been described of as in poetry. So it's just really interesting to see how a human has to fall into the world of the fae. And that's exactly what it is. It's Jude and her twin sister were adopted into this fae world, and the fae hate humans. For whatever reason, they hate them. So they really have to learn how to survive in this world, because all these rules are different. There's fruit that they can't eat, there's mirrors that they can't look in, there's all these things that they just can't do, and they had to learn how to live in this world. And it's just, it started off already interesting, and then Jude, her character takes this turn that I didn't see coming in the beginning, because it happens pretty early on, and it's just so cool because she really grows into herself, and it's just, I love it. I really do enjoy it. Cardan, Prince Cardan, is an ass. I just want to start there. You're not gonna like him in the beginning. You barely like him in the end, barely. So if you're going into it and you realize that, wow, this guy is like a super dick, yeah, he totally is. So just have that knowledge stored in your head, but I'm pretty sure he'll have some redeeming qualities in the next book. But who knows? He's a fae prince. Also, there's a plot twist in this that just like, there's just also, this is a lot of strategy, like war strategy, and it's really cool to kind of see that kind of situation with the fae. I never really talked about this. I did read this earlier on this year, and I mentioned that I liked it, but I do think that it's actually a very good fantasy book if you want to learn about a different kind of mythology. We normally hear like a very like particular kind of mythology in high fantasy where there's gods and goddesses and this is the way the world works, and we see the same kind of creatures like dragons and things like that throughout all the stories. So for the mythology alone in this book, because it's so different than the ones that we normally look at, I think that it's worth the read. And that's The Star-Touched Queen by Roshni Chokshi. It's just, I believe that the mythology is based off of Hinduism. I could be wrong, but it's just, we get to see a whole different kind of world that has been believed in. We get to see different mythological creatures, different rules. It's very, very cool, and it's written very beautifully. I do think that sometimes, I haven't read the second book yet, and I feel like she will have definitely improved upon her writing in the second one, but it was already very gorgeous in the first one. And basically, we follow this girl who was given a bad horoscope at birth. And in her world, horoscopes are very important. They're basically the drive that sets everything in motion for a person's life. And her horoscope went something along the lines of, death will follow you. So, or I want to read it exactly, wait. Yes, it's with a horoscope that promises a marriage of death and destruction. So no one wants to marry her, obviously, because her horoscope is actually saying death and destruction. If you marry this girl, death and destruction. So she gets to live sort of a very freeing life. Her father never really forces her into marriage, but we get to kind of see also her father. He has many wives, and he has many daughters that he already can send off to marriage, which is why it wasn't so important for her to be used as a tool. But then one day she actually is used as a tool in a plot for marriage, and turns everything on its head. It changes everything, and she thought she hated it until it actually happened, and she realized that this is probably the most freeing situation that could have happened to her. I don't know if that's a very good summary of this, but again, I really like this mostly for the mythology, not even really for the plot. It's just very beautiful. The next one on here is a pretty obvious one. I think that you guys were all waiting for me to talk about it, but I do think that this is a high fantasy recommendation video. This is high fantasy, and you gotta read it. You just gotta read it. I talk about it pretty often. And that's Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I know, I still have this mass market paperback, like what the heck. But it's just so good. Everything about the other books that I've kind of been talking about that I think is really fantastically written in that book, this book basically combines all of those elements and does them really perfectly. It's just, I love the magic system in this world. It's so different. You have to learn magic in this world. It doesn't just come to you. It's for a bright mind. It's for you. The more you know, the better you are at magic, and it's just so well done. And the politics are, I mean, the politics haven't really been introduced yet, but I really have a feeling that they're gonna take root in the second book, which I know I haven't read it yet, but there's a reason. It's because since there is no release date for the third book, I don't want to read the second book yet, because then I'm gonna be waiting just like all of you guys are, and I don't want to wait yet. But besides that, also just the actual world, so much thought went into it. Like from the actual currency to the days of the week, there's 10 days in this week, which why not? We never really see that, but why not? And it's just so cool. And his story, Kvolt's, I want to say that's how you pronounce his name. I listened to the audiobook, and so I only know how his name was said in the audiobook. But Kvolt's story is so interesting. It's from like this happy, wonderful childhood to just absolute heartbreak to, I don't want to ruin it, but just know like his story is so fascinating into how he gets to where he is. But the tagline is probably my favorite part, and it's kind of a line from his journal, and he says, "I've stolen princesses back from sleeping barrow kings. I burned down the city of Trebon. I've spent the night with Felurian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight that others fear to speak of during day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me." Read this, please. It's so intimidating. I know. That's why I had to pick up the audiobook. So if you have to pick up the audiobook like I did, just know it was actually a pretty dang good audiobook, so go for it. But yeah, you definitely have to read it. And the last book on this list, I know, you're probably thinking, where's Throne of Glass? Where's Nevernight? And the reason that I'm not talking about them is because you guys already know how much I love those series. Those are both high fantasy series that I recommend almost every single time I'm on camera, so I left them out. And the next one that I am talking about is One Dark Throne, or Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This is the darkest fantasy book that I can think of that I own right now. It's just, the premise is so cool. It is set in a queendom, which means that the entire queendom is obviously run by a queen, and each queen has triplets. And the triplets, one is a naturalist, one is an elementalist. I feel like I said that weird. Elementalist. And the third one is a poisoner. And these three queens are all brought up as queens, and they are brought up separately from each other, being raised by the poisoners, the naturalists, and the elementalists. They aren't raised by their mother. Their mother's long gone. Until the ripe age of, I want to say 16, but it could be 8. Oh, it's 16. Until the ripe age of 16, where the battle must begin for the crown. These three sisters will be competing for a year and trying to kill each other off so that the last one left standing becomes the queen. It's like, already that's pretty dark, and then you read the book and it gets darker, and all these things just happen that you're like, they break your heart. And this world, I only imagine it like cloudy. Always. It's just gloomy. That's the like atmosphere I get from these books. It's just such a different concept, and I love it so much. And if you haven't picked it up, which I'm sure you have, they're pretty dang popular, but if you haven't picked it up, I recommend October, because I'm pretty sure the third book comes out in October, actually. I was just saying October because, you know, October's all dark and creepy because of Halloween, but yeah, I'm pretty sure the third book comes out in October. So yeah, those are the 8 books on my high fantasy recommendations for series, I guess. Books that I recommend. Oh wow, I just got kind of confused. I'm sorry about that. So those are the 8 books on my high fantasy series recommendations, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, I'm sorry they're not that more underrated. I'm going to be getting into more underrated books, and then one day I will remake this video with an entirely new stack of books. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!